Your local hospital just lost 3 nurses to military deployment. The fire department can't find enough volunteers because half the town's young men joined the National Guard last month. Your child's school is combining classes because 2 teachers got called up for active duty. And this is all happening during peacetime. Last Tuesday, a mother in Michigan got a text message that changed everything. Deployment orders received. Will call tonight. Her husband, a weekend warrior in the Army Reserve, suddenly became a full-time soldier heading to Eastern Europe. She's not alone across America. Families are discovering that the military they thought was someone else's problem has become their immediate reality. According to Defense Department statistics and military readiness reports, America is experiencing the largest peacetime military activations since the Cold War, yet most American communities have no idea how unprepared they are for what's coming next. The uncomfortable truth is that while politicians argue about foreign policy and military budgets, American society has quietly become dependent on systems that can't function during sustained military operations. We've built a civilization that assumes peace will continue forever, and we're about to find out what happens when that assumption breaks down. Welcome to Crisis Zone. Today we're not asking what if war comes to America. We're asking what happens when America goes to war and discovers that home isn't ready. Let's start with numbers that Pentagon officials don't like to discuss publicly. According to Congressional Budget Office assessments and military recruitment data, America currently has about 450,000 active duty personnel available for combat deployment. That sounds impressive until you realize that defending American interests globally requires approximately 750,000 troops. The gap gets filled by National Guard and Reserve units, the part-time soldiers who also happen to be full-time teachers, nurses, firefighters, police officers, and skilled tradespeople in communities across America. When these units deploy overseas, they don't just take military capability with them, they take essential community services. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, roughly 15% of America's emergency responders hold military reserve status. In some rural areas, that percentage climbs above 30%. When military activation happens, entire counties can lose their ability to respond effectively to fires, medical emergencies, and natural disasters. The medical sector faces particularly severe challenges. According to American Medical Association reports, military medical personnel make up significant portions of specialized healthcare workers in communities near military bases. Deployment of these personnel creates healthcare shortages that affect civilian populations who have no connection to military families. But here's where the preparedness gap becomes truly dangerous. American civilian infrastructure depends on military logistics capabilities during major emergencies. The same transportation assets, communication networks, and supply chain management systems that deploy overseas are the ones that respond to hurricanes, wildfires, and industrial accidents at home. Educational systems reveal another critical vulnerability. According to Department of Education data, thousands of teachers nationwide hold military reserve commissions. Their deployment creates teacher shortages in communities already struggling with educational staffing. Children lose experienced educators, while parents lose child care options that allow civilian employment. The industrial base presents equally serious concerns. According to defense manufacturing reports, American weapons production depends heavily on skilled workers who also serve in Guard and Reserve units. Deploying these workers overseas reduces domestic production capacity exactly when military operations require increased weapons manufacturing. Financial implications compound every other readiness challenge. Major military operations require sustained federal spending that crowds out domestic priorities. According to economic analyses of previous conflicts, wartime spending typically reduces funding for infrastructure maintenance, social services, and community development programs that civilian populations depend on. Here's the mini recap. America's military readiness depends on civilian personnel and resources that communities need for basic services, creating a zero-sum competition between foreign military operations and domestic emergency response capabilities. Let me walk you through what military deployment actually looks like in American communities, because the human impact extends far beyond military families. Emergency medical services feel the impact immediately. According to emergency medical services statistics, many volunteer fire departments and ambulance services depend on personnel who also serve in military reserves. A single Guard unit deployment can eliminate half the EMT coverage in rural counties. Think about what this means during a medical emergency. When you call 911 expecting a 5-minute response time, but the nearest available ambulance is now 30 minutes away because the regular crew is deployed overseas, the war stops being abstract policy and becomes personal survival. Police departments face similar staffing challenges. According to law enforcement data, military reserve service is common among police officers who value the additional training and income. Deployment of these officers reduces patrol coverage, investigative capabilities, and community policing programs that maintain public safety. Educational disruptions affect entire family structures. When teachers deploy, schools must either hire substitute teachers with less experience or combine classes with larger student-to-teacher ratios. According to educational research, these disruptions reduce academic outcomes for students who have no connection to military service but suffer consequences from military operations. Parents face impossible choices when schools reduce hours or eliminate programs due to staff deployment. Working parents may need to leave jobs to provide child care, reducing family income exactly when military operations drive up living costs through inflation and supply chain disruptions. Healthcare systems experience cascading effects beyond direct personnel loss. Military medical deployments reduce civilian hospital staffing, which forces reduction in services, longer wait times, and delayed treatment for non-emergency medical needs. According to healthcare industry reports, these reductions affect entire regional medical networks. Local businesses suffer when military families relocate for deployment and when civilian employees leave for military service. Small towns near military bases experience economic volatility as deployment cycles create alternating periods of population increase and decrease that make business planning extremely difficult. Infrastructure maintenance becomes problematic when civilian contractors and public works employees deploy with military units. According to municipal management reports, many communities depend on workers who also serve in engineering and logistics military specialties. Their deployment can delay essential repairs to roads, utilities, and public facilities. Social services experience increased demand exactly when staffing decreases. Military families need additional support during deployment, while civilian families affected by economic and service disruptions also require assistance. According to social services data, these increased needs often exceed community capacity to respond effectively. Here's the mini recap. Military deployment creates staffing shortages in emergency services, law enforcement, education, health care, business, infrastructure, and social services that affect entire communities regardless of their connection to military operations. Now let's examine what sustained military operations mean for American families who never signed up for military service but find themselves living on an active home front. Economic pressures hit civilian families through multiple channels. According to economic research, military operations drive inflation in energy, food, and transportation costs while simultaneously reducing local employment opportunities due to personnel deployment. Families face higher living costs with reduced income potential. Child care becomes a crisis when military spouses deploy and civilian child care workers also serve in military reserves, according to child care industry reports. Many communities already face child care shortages that worsen significantly when military activation removes both parents needing care and workers providing care. Healthcare access deteriorates for civilian populations when military medical personnel deploy overseas. According to medical industry assessments, civilian hospitals lose staff while simultaneously facing increased demand from military families dealing with deployment stress and from civilian families experiencing economic hardship. Communication systems experience strain when military operations consume bandwidth and communication infrastructure. According to telecommunications analyses, civilian internet, phone, and television services may experience reduced quality and increased costs as military communications receive priority access. Transportation networks face capacity constraints when military movements compete with civilian travel needs, according to transportation industry data. Airports, highways, and rail systems experience congestion and scheduling disruptions that affect civilian business and personal travel. Energy costs spike when military operations compete with civilian energy consumption, according to energy industry reports. Military fuel demands drive up gasoline, heating oil, and electricity prices that affect every American household budget regardless of military connection. Financial services experience stress when military families manage deployment finances while civilian families cope with economic disruption. According to banking industry data, loan defaults, credit card debt, and mortgage difficulties increase during sustained military operations as economic pressure affects both military and civilian populations. Social cohesion faces challenges when communities divide between military-connected families who support operations and civilian families who bear costs without benefits, according to sociological research. These divisions can persist for years after military operations end and affect community cooperation on other issues. The psychological toll affects everyone, not just military families. According to mental health research, entire communities experience increased anxiety, depression, and stress disorders when local institutions become unreliable and economic security decreases due to sustained military operations. Here's the mini recap. Sustained military operations create economic pressure, supply chain disruption, child care crises, healthcare access problems, communication strain, transportation constraints, energy cost increases, financial service stress, social division, and psychological challenges that affect all American families. Here's what American communities can actually do to build resilience before military readiness gaps become community emergencies. Emergency services backup planning requires identifying civilian personnel who can provide essential services when military reservists deploy. According to emergency management experts, communities should cross-train volunteers in firefighting, emergency medical response, and disaster coordination to maintain capabilities during personnel shortages. Healthcare system redundancy involves developing relationships with medical professionals who can provide coverage when military medical personnel deploy. Communities should identify retired healthcare workers, establish mutual aid agreements with neighboring areas, and create volunteer networks that support healthcare delivery during staffing shortages. Educational continuity planning requires preparing for teacher shortages and school service disruptions. According to educational resilience research, communities should develop substitute teacher pools, create shared teaching resources among schools, and establish community learning support networks that function independently of formal school systems. Economic diversification reduces community dependence on military-related employment that becomes unavailable during deployment cycles. Communities should develop local business networks, support small-scale manufacturing, and create economic opportunities that remain stable regardless of military operational tempo. Communication backup systems ensure community coordination when normal systems experience military-related strain. Communities should establish amateur radio networks, community bulletin systems, and neighborhood communication trees that function independently of commercial telecommunications systems. Supply chain localization reduces dependence on logistics networks that prioritize military needs during operations. Communities should support local food production, encourage local manufacturing of essential goods, and create community resource sharing networks that reduce dependence on external supply chains. Financial mutual aid networks help community members manage economic stress during military-related economic disruptions. Communities should develop local lending circles, establish community assistance funds, and create skills-sharing networks that reduce cash dependence during economic stress periods. Social cohesion building prevents divisions between military-connected and civilian families during deployment stress. Communities should create inclusive support networks, establish community-wide emergency preparedness programs, and develop social activities that build relationships across different community populations. Here's the mini recap. Community resilience requires backup emergency services, healthcare redundancy, educational continuity, economic diversification, communication systems, supply chain localization, financial mutual aid, and social cohesion building that functions independently of military operational requirements. This isn't about opposing military operations or avoiding international responsibilities. This is about recognizing that sustained military engagement requires home front preparation that America hasn't seriously undertaken since World War II. The communities that maintain stability during military operations will be those that build redundant systems, develop local capabilities, and create social networks that function independently of military deployment cycles. Individual families can't solve systemic preparedness gaps, but they can build personal resilience that reduces dependence on vulnerable community services, while contributing to broader community resilience through participation in local preparedness networks. Ask yourself, if military deployment removed half your community's emergency responders, teachers, and healthcare workers tomorrow, would your family and neighborhood be prepared to maintain essential services through community cooperation? Subscribe to Crisis Zone and join Americans who understand that home front preparedness isn't about fear, it's about building communities strong enough to support military operations abroad while maintaining civilian life at home. Because while we can't control global military requirements, we can control how well our communities prepare for the reality that peace and war aren't separate experiences in modern America.